Java, the complete guide for beginners to learn Java programming fast. Java, Java for beginners, Java programming for beginners, Java programming, Java coding, Java crash course, Java workbook. Written by Leonardo Gorman, narrated by Mindy Newell. Introduction. The aim of this book is to help assist you with learning how and what programming and Java are. Most of us have heard the terms computer programming and coding, but may not know much else. Computer programming has been around since the invention of computers, as it is the manner in which a computer is organized in order to run various programs. Coding is the ability for someone to speak the language of the computer through a computer programming language. Just like with humans, computers have multiple languages they can use to speak to each other. If I have gained and piqued your interest with this first paragraph, this book is most definitely for you. Most of us are greatly interested in why and how we can learn how to gain more knowledge of control over a certain subject or thing. Computers are actually quite easy once we know the basic philosophies. Through the course of this book, I hope to have you comfortable with the terminology and basic functioning of computers in the fields of programming and using Java within the coding and programming world. Although I cannot promise that you will have enough skills and comfort with basic principles, you will be able to play in your own computer sandbox. More about that in the first chapter. Towards the end of the book, I go over a lot of helpful hints and resources that can be used to get a greater grasp on Java itself and how to use it. Although some of the many hints and terms may not make much sense to you now, remember that you are building a foundation and resource list to come back to as you run into speed bumps in your coding and programming journey. I encourage you to read through all of them and try to retain what you can, and come back for the rest when you need it. I encourage you to follow along with some of the ideas in this book in the Java program itself. Using this book as a how-to guide through your programming experience that can be used in tandem to create the most long-term memory for learning new things. Make sure to try things multiple times to make sure you understand the concepts completely and can easily replicate them at any given time, even if you need to look up a resource to be able to find exactly what you are looking for. Although it is not humanly possible to memorize everything, this book should give you general knowledge you can use in order to feel like you have a firm grasp on the beginning concepts of Java. With that, I look forward to you working your way through these chapters. The aptitude for learning skills like computer programming are really only inhibited by the amount of work you want to put into them. We shall start the adventure into programming with Java, with an entire chapter devoted to the basic terms and functions of programming, giving you a firm foundation in the virtual computer world. Chapter 1. What is programming? More than likely, you have heard the term programming before in your life, either on the internet or in a conversation with someone about technology. If you are like me, you may have just smiled and nodded your head in order to appear that you may know what the person is talking about, rather than admitting that you have absolutely no firm knowledge of what it entails. When it comes to computer programming, Java is the language we are looking at within the world of computer programming. It is important to have a basic understanding of programming before we can start getting into the nitty-gritty of what Java is. Most people can operate a basic graphic interface on a computer by clicking on icons or typing in a Word document to prepare a paper for school or a resume to gain employment. However, the original computers did not have these graphic icons and looked more like blocks and blocks of different texts strung together. In order to understand what all these countless characters on the screen meant, people had to learn how to speak the language of the computer. This is what programming, or computer programming in formal terms, really boils down to: an understanding of how to speak a computer's language to get it to carry out the tasks you want it to do. When you program, you always want to remember that although there are language rules and structural syntax rules that only allow you to do certain things, you can always improve upon the existing if you want to. There may be something that works well for others and not so much for you. If for whatever reason the way something is done does not make sense to you, look to outside resources in order to inform you as to why things are done in a certain way. Within the pages of this book, my goal is to give you a pretty good understanding of why and how things are done in Java. However, since this is a beginner's guide, there are certainly a lack of more intermediate and advanced options and descriptions that you may be ready for in a short period of time. In order to learn how to speak Java to a computer in order to program it, first, a somewhat in-depth idea of what computer programming is invaluable for a new programmer in training. The basic activities of computer programming are developing an understanding of programming itself, how to generate algorithms, ability to understand the computer analysis, idea of how to verify that your algorithms are correct, and finally to implement or code your desired algorithms, in this case, Java. First, here are some key terms that are also helpful to get used to using while developing your computer programming language skills. Common helpful programming terms and definitions. Algorithm, a way in which to use logically or mathematical skills in order to solve problems. API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is essentially a set of rules that allow code to communicate with other websites or software. Code, also known as source code. It is a collection of computer instructions written using a programming language. Code editor, a type of text editor program specifically designed for computer programmers, can be used as an application or can be integrated into software or a web browser. You essentially are able to check the code you have written like a traditional copy editor in a newspaper or magazine, just computerized. Compiler. This is a program that allows for you to take code written by you and is translated into what is known as binary, essentially ones and zeros that make up the actual machine code. Concatenation. This is the ability to combine strings of text together, things like two lists. Control flow. This is the computer's control over the order that sections of coding are run. Essentially, it is like rules of how the flow of data moves. Dump. This is a list of data or something like a text file that is saved in the event of your program crashing. It can be very helpful in diagnosing problems, why the crash occurred. Floating point. Basically, it is a decimal number where the decimal itself is referred to as the floating point. Example 4.56. Function. Written instructions that obtain a particular result with the ability to be used simply by writing them or calling them. Git. This is a portion of distributed software used for revision control that is used as a source code management system, also referred to by the acronym SCM. GUI. This acronym stands for General User Interface, referring to the software you are able to see and interact with. The icons are programs you would generally think of, i.e., Internet browser. IDE. This is an acronym that stands for Integrated Development Environment. It is slightly more advanced than your basic code editor. Interpreter. This is something that allows for translations of the computer coding, machine code, when a program is in use. Iteration. Instructions that are repeated. JSON. This is a format used to transmit information to and from locations. Libraries. Pre-written code that is used to implement common coding features which you do not have to write yourself. Logical operation. Using Boolean logic, and, or, and not are the key words when using this type of operative computer coding. Loop. The use of a piece of code that runs until a condition placed on it is filled. Markup language. A language format like HTML that is relatively simple and used to format pages. Nested. An instance where one thing is contained inside of another. Pseudocode. General description of the pathway between code and written language. This is code written in English that allows for a message to be sent to tell a given piece of code what to do. Recursion. This occurs when something actually refers to itself. Runtime. This is the time that a program is in use or running. Sandbox. Testing ground in which to run a program test. SDK, an acronym that stands for Software Development Kit. SDK is a bundle of software tools that allow you to create new applications for specific framework or platforms. Subroutine, a portion of code or a function that can be run anywhere inside of a program. Syntax, the set of rules in a computer language that guide usage or correct structure. Variable, this is data stored that has the ability to be modified by the user whenever they would like to. Now that you have a small dictionary of terms to help you understand key concepts, I will now provide more thorough descriptions of how and what programming works and what it is. These next few paragraphs will give you an excellent foundation of knowledge for what and how to program. This beginner's guide to understanding will have you set on a proper knowledge and explanation of basic programming principles. What is programming? Computer programming is defined as a process where one takes a computing problem and turns it into an executable computer program. The end goal of programming is to be able to discover instructions in a given programming language that will allow for solving a problem or automate performing a specific task. In order to fully understand how to execute this process, one should have good analytical skills, an understanding of how a computer works, be able to understand and generate algorithms, and finally implement or code algorithms of a given programming language. Keep in mind that there is more than one language, so the world of programming is much, much larger than the scope of this book. In addition to these basic principles, I want to reiterate how learning computer programming code is really laying the foundation for either the system itself or a program to be used in it. When you are programming, you need to be debugging and testing while maintaining the source code. Essentially, once you start doing coding for yourself of a program or system, you need to be able to problem solve and diffuse the issues with code quickly. This book should serve as an excellent beginner's guide and give you the skills you may need to troubleshoot issues you may have while starting the process. Also, with programming and coding, you are learning how to build and implement the system. These terms are often used interchangeably to describe programming of the computer itself, creating source code, or implementing said program or coding. Once you get more familiar with what programming and coding can do, you will learn how they really work together in order to create the virtual environment, but also be able to identify the subtle differences. How to generate algorithms. Algorithms are important because they allow for us to do things in the computer world, like schedule tasks, design computer algorithms, and even solve other optimization issues. Essentially, they are something a computer does to instruct it to complete a task in an efficient manner. Sometimes people even refer to them as recipes because they are similar in the structure and the fact that if you find a good way to carry out a certain task, it can be very rewarding, much like warm chocolate chip cookies are from a traditional recipe. As for you and creating your own algorithms, this can be a complex task for any computer developer, even more so when you are first starting out. The good news is that you probably will not be dealing with the high-level algorithms for a long time. Those algorithms that you will be using are things like creating everyday functions or writing loops. Essentially, you are writing an algorithm to complete a task for you. There is a simple test list for creating an efficient algorithm design. You want to use language features that enable you to reduce operations. You want to reduce iterative loop nesting as best as you can. You want to have the ability to define variables outside of loops when it is possible. Try to use automatic loop indexing instead of manually doing so. Try to use clever reduction techniques, things like conquer and query optimization, in an effort to minimize the size of recursive processes. Basically, when you are creating or using an algorithm, you want to settle on something that not only completes a task and solves a problem, you also want this to be done in the most efficient way possible. One way to gain insight to what is efficient is to look at the work that has already been done by others. Within this book, I will not be able to give you a complete understanding of algorithms, but I most certainly want to give you a good place to start. I am going to give you examples and, from here, I hope that you will have a good jumping-off point for your future projects. This example is a very simple and somewhat standard example of an algorithm. It is often referred to as the Hello World program, and the following will be an example of it. In the next chapters, I will go over how to use and run Java. This is just an example of something you may want to input and try. Beginner algorithm. Sample algorithm. Public, class, hello world. Public, static, void, main, string, args. System.out.println, hello world. That is a very basic example of an algorithm you may use to start to understand how your programming skills can be used. If ever you are trying to get an algorithm to function and not having any luck, check something simple like the spacing or wrong character or symbol. It usually boils down to a simple error. Understanding computer analysis. As the word analysis suggests, computer analysis consists of looking and troubleshooting for problems or software issues within your system or programs. Essentially, being able to understand how a computer works is a key component to be able to isolate any issue and solve it. This part of the programming is something you should have a good firm grasp on. As with any new task to learn, it is good to be very familiar with how and why your hardware or tools operate. This is the same with computer analysis. Keeping up with the newest technologies, programs, and incorporating how and why you should use a method or program is important to know. Picking up this book and reading it is a great start to learning how coding and programming works. After you have mastered Java, do not fear. There are many different languages and systems to explore and master as well. The greatest thing about technology is that it is constantly being innovated into the best possible thing it can be. Knowing how to secure systems and resolve issues will get you very far in many aspects of life, particularly when sensitive issues or data may be at stake, eventually something you will deal with as a programmer. How to verify your code is correct. One sure way to verify if your code is correct is to try and run it. However, if the code is something you are doing outside of your sandbox and you have several other methodologies to use to ensure you are getting your correct message across. There are many different online websites serving as code editors that you can utilize in order to check code. These are websites such as Tinkerbin, Write Code Online, or CodePad. Basically, if you do a Google search for a code editing program for any language you are using, you will be able to find a suitable interface to do so. Having a sandbox to play around with your code is a very efficient way in which to check your code. By utilizing this method, you are able to create a virtual environment to test out code to make sure it will complete the proper function. This is important if you are going to code something that will affect the ability of a program, software, or even website that you are attempting to build. Another great resource you can use to help ensure you have proper code is something called a library. As you are probably familiar with a library of books, this is similar as it is a large virtual library that contains code. Using this method can be great if you need to make sure something is up to par and working. However, I would caution that you always be able to understand the code you are using, even check that code with a code editor. You should be able to understand the code in order to fix it if a problem arises. If you just copy and paste from a library without understanding, it could lead to huge potential issues down the road. Now that you have a great general foundation for what programming is, let us move on to Java specifically. I will lay out in the next few chapters some important understanding of what and how to use Java and its functions. This will all build on the information in this chapter, so hopefully you have a fairly firm understanding of some of the main parts of the world of coding and programming. Chapter 2. What is Java? Now that you have a better idea of what programming is, let us move into learning about exactly what Java is and how it fits into the world of coding and programming. As a computer programming language, which is what Java is, it is designed to be a language that is class-based, object-oriented, concurrent, and has the least implementation dependencies as possible. Essentially, any platform that supports Java can run Java without a need for recompilation. This is one of the reasons that Java is one of the most popular languages in use today. One phrase that developers use to describe the multi-platform use of Java is write once, run anywhere, also known by the acronym WORA. As a language, you may have a learning curve when it comes to the understanding of why and how certain things are done within the language. Typically, within this book, I tried to give as many explanations to you as possible without getting into unnecessary detail for you at the beginner level. With that being said, as with the English language, there will probably be rules and situations you do not fully understand why they are formatted or done in a certain way. Rather than spending time and effort into understanding these things, I encourage you to just accept them as they are. Although you may want a better answer than that, unfortunately, I think only the creators themselves know the reasoning behind them, and it may even just boil down to their preference or the computer's ability to understand. Java was created by a man named James Gosling in 1995. He designed Java as a programming language that has fewer low-level facilities than languages like C and C++. Essentially meaning that it focuses on the high-level essentials for running computer programs rather than the more minute and micro details that these other programming languages have. There are 5 main goals that Gosling used to guide him in the creation of Java. These are that 1. It must be threaded, interpreted, and dynamic. 2. It must be object-oriented, simple, and familiar. 3. It must be secure and robust. 4. It must execute with high performance. And 5. It must be portable and architecture neutral. These 5 goals explain why it is such a commonly used language. There are goals that allow for users to have a mainstream, usable, and effective method for building anything from software to a website. User-friendly programs are something that bring the complexities of computer programming into a more relatable experience, especially for new users and those just starting out learning. This is why I personally recommend and find it important for beginners to have a firm grasp on. It is very widely used and therefore pretty important to know and understand for anyone trying to work, or even just have as a hobby, computer programming and coding. Now that there is a little background on Java, how do you get the actual program running on your own system? Basically, one of the more difficult things to start coding Java is acquiring all of the necessary tools to run it. Java is an independent platform, which means it will run on just about any operating system. The reason for this is a program called Java Virtual Machine, also called Java Runtime Environment. In order to start coding in Java, you need to download this program in order to do so. You can actually make sure you have this program, as some computers do have it installed, or install it through the Java website. There are options for many operating systems, so you should be good to go once you are able to locate it and download it. So now you have downloaded or discovered you had this program. What does it mean? It means that you can run Java on your computer. We will get to the actual program to download the coding now. That is known as Java's Software Development Kit. It can be downloaded off the Oracle website. It is the company that owns Java. The one you want to use is called Java SE, Standard Edition. For the purposes of being able to code, we are going to do so using something called NetBeans. So once you find Java SE, you will want to find an option that is called JDK8 with NetBeans. You are also going to want to go to the NetBeans website and download software there. After you have gained access to the software, we are ready to code. Essentially, once you have all the correct software, you are going to begin to write your code in a text editor. If you choose a different option than NetBeans, you will find the place where you write the source code saved under the file extension .java. There is a program known as Javac that then turns source code into Java bytecode. This process is called compiling. Just FYI. After Javac has completed its task, it creates a new file with the extension of .class instead of .java. That is, if no errors are detected in your code. Otherwise, you will have to go back and find that probably small error you made and fix it. Finally, at this point, you can run your code on the Java virtual machine. In case it is more helpful for you, here are the 3 basic steps you will use to get your code running. First is to create your source code with the .java extension. Then you will use Javac to create a file ending in .class. And third, you run the compiled class. Now that you have a greater understanding of how you will create and complete actual coding within Java, you should be able to begin the process of creating your own codes. Within the suggested NetBeans software, it is a great environment to teach yourself some of the ins and outs of Java. This chapter really serves as a basic description of the software and a very general overview of a way to download and begin to use it. Throughout the remainder of this book, I will talk more about some of the technicalities that help you understand how and why you must do certain things in Java. In effect, learn to speak the language fairly fluently, with the knowledge of how things work to back up your fluency of language. Chapter 3. Conditions and Control Flow. In order to properly be able to utilize Java, it is important to understand the rules of the language, like grammar and spelling in the English language. In order to properly tell the computer what to do, we need to understand what the terms, conditions, and control flow really mean within the coding and programming world. For conditional statements, we can think of these as if-then statements that are used to tell the computer different actions to perform or computations to make. As for control flow, it is the order in which instructions, statements, or function calls of a program are executed or evaluated. You can think of these as sort of the rules for sentence structure and the usage of a comma, semicolon, or other literary symbolically represented rule. These are very important in programming because computers, unlike humans, do not have deductive reasoning skills. They carry out the functions exactly as they are told to do so. Both the conditions and control flow work together in order to create the proper environmental flow of data. Without either of these concepts, it would be difficult to have Java work in the user-friendly manner that it does. A key component of a computer is that it is reliable as well as straightforward, without multiple interpretations of the same thing. Computers do not read minds. They execute tasks as their function. Conditions. If you have taken an English class in high school or college, you probably have heard the term conditional statement within that context. Although this is obviously a different context than an English classroom, the basic functionality is roughly the same. There are 2 different types of programming languages, functional and imperative. Java falls into the imperative category, so we will be covering the specific conditions of this type of programming. When we look at imperative programming languages, we see the term conditional statement typically used. These essentially are structures having one or more conditions that need to be executed if the statement or statements have determined to be true. Some are also executed if they are false, depending on the statement. In Java, we see 4 types of statements that are made. These 4 statements are if-else statements, if statements, switch statements, or finally, nested if statements. There are if statements that are Boolean expressions. Boolean is when there are 2 outcomes, like true or false. Whereas if-else statement occurs when if statement is followed by an else statement. When it is executed in the code, it will return the answer of false. A nested if statement is something that is two statements with one nestled inside of the other. These are either if or else statements. Finally, a switch statement is one that takes a variable and tests it against a list of given variables. These statements are all made up of questions that a computer can process and execute functions that are, at each of their essences, made up of Boolean or two outcome expressions, except for switch statements, which compare one variable against a list. For example, what is the greatest number, maximum number, in a given list? Although multiple statements may be wrapped inside of another with that if statement format of any kind, it is important to remember that at their core they are asking simple to-answer questions. As I stated before, computers are incapable of inference, and this really drives this point to home. These questions demand either of two responses, or it will create a third option of an error. Next, we will address more about control flow and how these statements are executed in the programming. It will also have some overlap with these conditional statements, as they are both methods of communicating, coding, what the computer should do and how it should do it. Control flow. As I stated earlier, control flow is the manner in which a given program executes or evaluates statements. As with any language, there are a lot of rules you have to follow in order to communicate properly to another person. In this case, machine. It is important to understand the reasoning behind these things in order to properly speak the language of the computer. Learning about control flow, even if we are specifically talking about Java, can easily be applied to other languages, although specifics may not be exactly the same. This is another part of building the foundation for your programming and coding future, so it is important to make sure you understand it as well as possible. Control flow statements are different in each different programming language. However, they can be categorized by the effect they have. There are 5 unique categories that these statements can fall into. These 5 statements are: 1. A set of statements executed only if a condition is met. 2. Continuation of execution at a different statement. A set of statements executed 0 or more times until a specific condition is met. A set of distant statements after they are executed. The flow will return. And finally, 5. Stopping of the program. This will prevent any further execution. Now in Java, when we are dealing with something like a common loop control statement, specifically we are looking at the change a loop statement makes from its normal sequence. Java specifically supports 2 different types of control statements in this scenario: break statements and continue statements. Break statements are those that terminate the loop, also known as the aforementioned switch statement as I discussed above, in which the actual execution moves on to whatever immediately follows the loop switch. A continue statement is one that tells the program to essentially skip any code following it and retest the condition. Essentially, when we look at both conditions and control flow, we see things that tell the computer what it should or should not do. Through programming, we are able to give the computer specific instructions on how and why it should execute statements. Although these are really very brief definitions and descriptions of what and how both of these mechanisms operate, they give you an excellent foundation for knowing how they work. Utilizing the use of statements like these is important work to figure out while you are learning Java. The benefits of Java are that these are routine functions, and there is a lot of trial and error that can be easily done when you begin to experiment with coding and programming. These are important and key features you should certainly feel comfortable with before moving on to anything more advanced. At each step of your programming journey, make sure you are practicing and making sure you are firm in your ability and knowledge of what and how and why you are doing any procedure. Chapter 4. Object-Oriented Java. In this type of an object-oriented language, which is what Java can be described as, you are looking at a program paradigm that is really based on the concept of objects. These objects can contain data in the form of fields, often called attributes, and code that is in the form of procedures, often referred to as methods. One of the features of an object is that the object's procedures have the ability to access and often modify the data fields of a given object they are associated with. As Java is an object-oriented language, there are fundamental concepts that it utilizes in order to fall into this class of language. The concepts of classes and objects are of particular importance and what we will discuss and analyze in this chapter. In terms of Java, an object has both states and behaviors. When we talk about class in this programming context, we are looking at the outline that allows for a description of the state or behavior that the object supports. Essentially, class is what you use to define what the object is. Now let's get a little clearer understanding of what each of these things are, starting with objects. When we think about real-world objects, we probably think about things like dogs, other people, or cars. Each of these objects we think of does have a state as well as a behavior, just as it does within Java. If we want to look at a human, for example, they have different states, names, skin colors, and ethnicity. And they also have behavior, speaking, working, or sleeping. Each of these states and behaviors can be thought of as different parts of the same person. In fact, every person has a different set of behaviors and states, just as with most objects we interact with on a daily basis. In comparison with real-world objects, there can be very similar characteristics in some instances. The state of software object is stored within the fields and behavior is shown in the methods. So basically, methods are internally operating both the singular object and allowing the communication to happen via a method between objects. Just as with the human example, we have internal communication happening within ourselves, and we use these internally stored methods to gain access to other objects, whether that be a car, computer, or another human. So what about class? It can be defined as the blueprint that individual objects are created from. There are 3 different types of variables that any class can contain. These variables are local variables, instance variables, and class variables. Local variables are those that are localized or within your method. They are initialized and declared locally or within the method. When the method is completed, the variable will then be destroyed. Instance variables are those that inside of a class but actually are outside of methods. They occur when the class itself is instantiated. The instance variables have the ability to be accessed from any blocks or constructors of the class they are a part of. The last variable type, class variables, are those that, as the name suggests, are within the class. They operate outside of any method, however they can use methods in order to access values. What do we do if we would like to create an object from a class itself? There are actually 3 different steps that will allow us to do just that. These steps are declaration, initialization, and instantiation. A variable declaration is when a variable has both an object type with a name for the variable. An instantiation is the new keyword that you would use to create a given object. Finally, initialization is what is used to call a given constructor and has the ability to initialize the new object. For example, you could create a person, object, in the human class, and then name the puppy Spot, giving name to the constructor and creating a new object. Let me give you a little more clarification on constructors in the next paragraph. When we look more into classes, we have to also talk about constructors. Constructors are a bit of code allowing you to create a given object from a class. Constructors are a necessity in every class. If you do not include one, the Java compiler actually creates a default constructor for the class at hand. You can always be certain that if you create an object, one or more constructors will be invoked for that object. Technically, constructors should really have a name that is the same as the class they are in. However, classes can have more than one given constructor. For example, if you had a class known as Puppy, the constructors could be Lab or Bulldog, or like the example in the previous paragraph of a name like Spot. Now let us talk a little bit about some rules that are needed to be followed when you are declaring classes. Source file declaration rules. These source file declaration rules are actually essential when you are doing things with your different source file statements or import statements. They are also important when you are declaring given classes, which is a Java class file with the .class extension. You can only have one public class per source file. The package statement should always appear first inside of a package. One source file is able to have multiple non-public classes. When dealing with import statements, you always need to remember that statements are written sandwiched between both the class declaration and the package statement. If you do not have any package statement, the very first line in the given source file should be the import statement. If you have both source files and public class files, you should have them both be the same name. They should also be appended by .java at the end of the file. Example, administrator.java. When you have both import and package statements, the classes they are associated with will be applicable fully in any source file that you are using. You cannot have source files that contain package and import statements associated with different classes within the source file. Chapter 5. Data structures. Within Java, there are certain types of data that are used and defined by the program. I am sure that, in some form or another, you have heard of data. It could be the gigabytes of megabytes of data used by your cell phone, or maybe you have a backup for your computer that stores data in terabytes. Each of these different terms tells you how much data your device or backup can support and use. When it comes to data itself, there are many different ways we use this terminology both inside the virtual world and in the real world. When we look at data, I personally think of it as something that gives me quantifiable means to look into or solve a problem or question I may have. Within the world of Java, data is just defined in its own computer programming and coding language manner. In terms of the type of data Java can support, it is much vaster than the typical byte data you have heard in the past. Java actually can support 8 different primitive data types. These data types are byte, short, integer, referred to as int, long, float, double, Boolean, and char. Now that you have heard these types of data, let's break them down and tell you what they mean and what they can do for a user. Byte. A byte is what can be considered a unit of memory size that is actually a group of bits, or binary units. Typically 8 that is operated on as a unit. What does this mean for your usage of Java? Well, within Java, it has a minimum value, or -128, and a maximum inclusive value of 127, as well as has a default value of 0. This type of byte data is actually used in Java to save space in large arrays, most of the time in the place of integers, as a byte is actually 4 times smaller than an integer. Typically, you will see byte represented in a similar fashion to this: EX -100 byte. Short. Where byte data requires full integers, you can use short data to contain integer values that do not actually need or require the entire width of integer. Short data can, in some cases, pack your short variables closely together in an effort to save memory consumption. Within Java, short data type is 16-bit data with a minimum value of -32.768 or maximum value of 32,767, also with a default value of 0. These amounts are actually 2 simple equations: -2 to the power of 15 and 2 to the power of 15 minus 1, respectively. This type of data is also good for saving memory as a byte-type data we spoke about in the previous byte section. That being said, short data can be used in an effort to save memory as the byte-type data, as it is 2 times smaller than an integer. A couple of examples of how you may see short data are short s equals 20000, or short r equals negative 100000. Int. This type of data, in long, unabbreviated form, is actually referred to as integer data. The definition of integer data is that it is a very small subset of mathematical integers that can be seen as a group of what is known as binary digits, often referred to as bits. Computer hardware always wants to have a way for the user to represent data, like memory address or processor register, as an integer. In terms of its uses in Java, integer or int data is a 32-bit signed 2's complement integer with a minimum value of negative 2147483,648 and a maximum inclusive value of 2147483,647, and has a default value of 0. These can be represented by the equations negative 2 to the power of 31 and 2 to the power of 31 minus 1, respectively. Integer data is the most commonly used data type for integer values. In fact, it is often used as the default type of data. If there is a concern about memory, however, you may not want to use this method. As you can see, the minimums and maximums are substantially larger than the previous two types of data. You will also see this data represented in a format such as int a equals 20000 and int b equals negative 10000. Long. As you would gather from its namesake, long data is in fact very long in the minimum and maximum values it utilizes. The minimum data value for long data is negative 9223736854775,808, and the maximum is 922233726854775,807, and is inclusive with a default value of 0L. These are all represented by the equations negative 2 to the power of 63 and 2 to the power of 63 minus 1. Long data is used when a much wider range than integer data is needed. You will see long-form data like these examples. Long A equals 20000L, or long B equals negative 10000L. Float. With float data, we are looking at a single provision 32-bit IEEE 754 floating point. When you want to save memory, you may want to look into this option to be able to save larger data amounts. The default value for this data is 0.0f, and this type of data is never used for values that are considered precise, such as currency. You will see it represents like float f1 equals 345.6f. Double. Double data is a type of double precision 64-bit IEEE 754 floating point data. This type of data is the default used for storing decimal values. Always remember that these types of data should not be used when you are dealing with precise values or whole integers. We have a default value of 0.0d for this type of data. Example, double D1 equals 567.8. Boolean. We talked about Boolean data briefly before. Boolean data is the type of data that only has two different outcomes, true or false. It is used in order to find and track both true and false conditions. Always remember that, unlike you may be inclined to think, the actual default value is this data set, rather than some form of 0, is false. This makes sense when you look at true and false as the only possible outcomes. You would see this type of data represented in an example like Boolean 1 equals true. Char. This char, or character, type of data is a single 16-bit Unicode character. This data is represented by a minimum value of '*U0000 or 0, and the maximum value is '*UFFFF or 65,535. And the maximum value is inclusive. This type of data is used to store any character. An example of how you would see this data is char letter B equals B. Now at the beginning of talking about data, I wrote that these are primitive types of data. Something that may be helpful to you when you are thinking of data is referring to our previous content above about classes that is actually non-primitive data. However, they are both ways of representing something in our coding and programming that are ways in which we categorize and store materials or data. Data in any sense is something that we gather and organize in order to properly explain or store for future use. Although these various types of data may seem somewhat obscure by just reading these definitions, once you start experimenting and seeing how various algorithms or coding is developed in your own usage, you will find reasons for each of their uses. Reference data. Within the world of Java data, we will also see what is referred to as reference data types. We can view reference variables as those that are created when actually utilizing constructors of the given class or classes to define them. These types of data are used as a method in which to actually access objects. Reference variables are those that are not able to be changed as a point of definition. For example, puppy or employee. There are some variables and class objects that actually have a reference variable without value, or null. Using these, you can refer to objects that can be compared with each other. An example of this is animal equals new animal, cat. Any primitive type data can be seen as literal. Source code that is literal is something that has a fixed value or unchangeable. Basically, you cannot have anything within the value other than the code, having no computation. These literals can be assigned to any primitive type of variable. Example, char d equals d. When you think of literal, it somewhat means a taking at word at the base sense, most literal value. There are also what is called string and char literals that support few special escape sequences that are good to note. These are things like /n, which means new line, /b, or backspace, /s, or space, // which is backslash, /t, or tab, /apostrophe, which is single quote, /quote, or double quote, /r, or carriage return, /f, or form feed, and finally /ddd, or octal character. These special escape sequences may come in handy for you in the future. Take reference of them for now, and there will be times in your programming that they may be useful. The beginning of this chapter really helped to explain data types. Now we are going to switch gears and talk about variables. Variables. As with any math-based activity, you can manipulate the variables in Java in order to name specific variables in a helpful way. Each variable does have different sets of rules that are associated with it that can be applied to the variable at hand. Within Java, you must declare a variable before it is used. There are the 3 different types of variables we can use in order to give proper categories of organization for the variables themselves. In the previous chapter, we discussed variables in some detail. The reason for addition and additional section in this chapter is to bring to your attention how they are related to the data and data structures. It is important to remember that there are other forms of data than the memory we assign to them to let us know how much room we need for them. Chapter 6. Helpful Hints and Resources. Helpful Hints. When it comes to hints, I'm going to refer to those that would be used within the NetBeans software I recommended you download in order to run Java in the beginning of the book. There are 29 helpful hints in using the program. However, if you have chosen a different software than NetBeans, you can access more helpful hints that I will go into more detail in the resources section following this. I will break the 29 hints down into short categories that can be used as a helpful reference guide if you run into trouble. These different hints can be found in greater detail on the NetBeans website. In case any of the terms or suggestions are confusing, I suggest you head there for more clarification, or even a quick Google search on a term could help as well. There are a good deal of terms and explanations below. Be sure to not be overwhelmed by the vast amount of information. Start coding and programming within NetBeans to understand more about how these tips can be of assistance in your programming and coding. It can be difficult to fully grasp them without the software working in front of you. Before we continue with the hints and resources, I wanted to point out one last philosophy that has served me well, which is to try to aim for the middle ground and not allow yourself to get too caught up in details or sloppily rush through and miss potentially important ones. As you learn and grow within your skill set, you will begin to understand the somewhat subtle differences that can make your coding and programming far more understandable to both you and the computer. Abstraction. Sometimes when you are dealing with typecast, it may actually be too strict, and if you cast to a more general type, that would be sufficient for the actual expression. There are instances casted to a specific subtype. However, methods invoked or the fields used from the casted instance that is defined by a supertype. This too specific vast introduces really unnecessary coupling to the code, limiting its extensibility. APIs. The API technologies will be made option in Java EE 7. They may be available now, but in the future the options may not be present. Essentially, remember that technology is ever-changing and never rely too heavily on newly introduced options. Also, make sure that return and parameter types of all public methods on any type of public fields are available to anyone to use. Basically, many people may be using these same things, so just keep that in mind for security purposes. Not something you need to worry about if you are just building and coding in a sandbox environment. Assignment issues. When you assign operations, always remember that you could code using operator assignment. Theoretically, it may be more clear if you do use the operator assignment. You can also assign to a variable declared as a catch block parameter. However, this may be confusing when just starting out. Loop parameters reports to a given and declared variable for a statement within the statement, as we spoke of briefly earlier. This could be confusing when it occurs accidentally, which often happens as a result of a typo. It is good to get familiar with what and how that operates and looks like in case you should have an issue in the future. As with the other nested assignments, they can also be confusing as they include a separate statement within a statement. Make sure you are aware of the expressions and how they work, as they could violate some general design principles of your coding, as most constructs should do just one thing. Bitwise operations. Within bitwise operations, we see things like incompatible masks that allow for you to know that you have created a bitwise expression that is guaranteed to be evaluated false. There are also inspections that report that there are instances of pointless bitwise expressions that have to deal with scoring by 0. Also, we will see an inspect report that states values have shifted and it is both constant and outside the reasonable range. Braces. When to use the braces symbols are for things like do-while loops and for loops. They are the proper time to use braces. along with if-else statements. You should always use braces within these types of statements. Class structure. Class structure is something that is a data method we will certainly always see and has the potential need for organization and firm definitions. Within this section, it can be important to remember that a class may be an interface, and that is okay. Also, there will be reports on things like the final class, method, and the final private method. The initializer may actually not access instance variables or methods and could just execute once, not during each individual instance creation. Remember that to ensure you redo it if needed. You also have the ability to do things like organize, member, or even protect them in their final class. We also look at constructors that are both non-public and public as a factor. Code maturity issues. We see code maturity issues when the code we use may be outdated or obsolete. You may see something like obsolete collection or system out errors and other efforts to debug and remove outdated and unusable code. Empty statements. These empty statement type of programs run and check for empty statements of all kinds, including after words like do, for, if else, or even while. This allows for another check to make sure that you will not have an error in your coding due to a simple error. Encapsulation. This is a large field that is designed to find out more about what you have incorporated or encapsulated and protected within your code. This is going to be things such as warnings about assignments of different data, warnings about package fields, or protecting inner class. Also, it will look at protected and public data to warn you of anything publicly seen within these categories. Enterprise Java Beans. All of these types of tips have to do with keeping everything in line with the Enterprise Java Beans through their own system of alerting you to things like incomplete sessions or method issues, or even things like local and remote interface together or just a lack of usage of certain constructs. It can be very helpful, as all of these tips are, to be aware of, to check that everything is running smoothly. Error fixes. These are things like finding missing on project class paths of Java EE API, or that you can access things like creating a field or local variable. These all help you to find and fix errors that you may not be aware of. Finalization. These finalization tips have to do with getting warnings about the finalization tasks your computer may need to go through. These are going to be things that say things like finalize declared, does not call super.finalize, not declared protected finalizations, or even an explicit calling of a finalize. It is just as important to know how to end things as it is to be able to start them. If you have holes in your finalization, potential malicious things could happen to your system, as with holes in any part of your coding or programming structure. General. These general functions will assist you with removing redundant content and making sure you are using functional operations. These general functions will also warn you of a general wrong package or other fairly easy to spot issue, as well as easy to fix. These are probably some of the more beginner-friendly type of tips and tricks to deal with in the beginning stages of your Java learning experience. Imports. With imports, you have quite a few options that can be utilized within the import genre of instructions. You can import from the same package, or from Java language package, or even from classified or excluded packages. You can also use a tool to organize your imports, as well as add things like starring or unused imports to help categorize them. Initialization. Initialization tips and tricks are to be aware of certain key variables that could possibly get in the way of not fully initialized things. This could be passing suspicious parameters within the constructor or even a problematic call in the constructor itself, and finally a static non-find variable that is used during initialization. All of these could potentially cause problems or issues for you if not addressed. JDK Migration Support. Within this category, we are looking at ways in which you will get warnings of potential issues that you should be aware of. These things, like not using annotation as a super interface, converting different resources like finally block to try within an attempt to figure out a given problem, There is an @override annotation to warn you of an override situation. There are many similar types of warnings and issues that come up within all of the programming tools. In this category, the terms are very explanatory and will essentially tell you how to fix the problem within the message itself. Java Code Metrics. Java Code Metrics are a series of potential alerts to things that are going wrong within your code. This could be anything from classes having too many instructors, fields or methods, or even that the class itself is too complex or coupled. Remember that you can get overly complex with your coding at any point, and the system may not be able to properly process your data because of it. You will also see words about anonymous classes having too many methods or complexities as well as arithmetic expressions. Java Persistence API. You will use Java Persistence API really to check and validate different classes and such. There are lots of phrases that in this particular section will start with verify and have you figure out things like finding location or subclass and verifying access levels or other attributes. You also can do things with the entity table names or serializable variables that an entity has. There is also a need for instructions on what classes need to have default public protected constructors. JavaDoc. Two good terms to know for JavaDoc are create JavaDoc or error in JavaDoc. These are the basic two phrases that allow you to create something in JavaDoc or know and be aware of an error you need to look into. Java Server Faces. Instead of using Java Server Faces, as it will be depreciated in the next version, it is recommended that you use CDI and Java EE instead. Logging. You have probably logged in and out through various instances on computers. Within Java, you will see phrases like multiple loggers, no loggers, or logger declaration is not static final. These are all class-based things you are alerted to just either for your own information or to change something about the logging process you have created. Maven. This is really used to solve a missing class dependency. It alerts you to add to projects. NetBeans Development. There are terms you may see in NetBeans that allow you to see errors or issues with the work you are doing. These may be phrases like empty cancel for cancelable tasks or help CTX issues. These warn of misuses or .org.openide.util.helpctx or instances of illegal uses of instance of operator. Using the phrase @nbbundle.messages to bundle properties. All of these can and should be explored further within NetBeans itself. As we did not cover the ins and outs of NetBeans, there are a lot of opportunities to learn more in their libraries. Performance. There are lots of performance tips that can assist you with improving your coding methods. There are things like creating new Boolean phrases and boxing an already boxed value that will decrease your performance to some extent and are really not cost-effective time-wise. There are also methods that do not allow for optimal performance when you begin to call things like string.toString. There is no use for reinventing the wheel most of the time, and you can get yourself into trouble. It is usually most efficient to just utilize string and not try to overcomplicate it, especially when you are learning. Probable bugs. There is a very long list of probable bugs, so many in fact I am just going to list what they are. As you can infer from that what their purpose is. There are finally blocks that suppressed exceptions. You can also throw inside a finally block or even @checkReturnValue. There are also .equals on array, incompatible types, and null. There are annotations without runtime retention, assertions that have side effects, or what is called a boxed value identify comparison. You also may run into cloneAble class that does not implement said clone, or a compare that does not use its parameter. If you have confusing indentation, spacing, this could also present a problem for you. There is also sometimes confusing primitive data array passed on to what is called var_args method, or if you have a hint of something throwable instead of thrown, it will be discarded. There are also a series of bugs that have to do with malformed data types that can cause a red flag to these to get you to address and hopefully fix them. This is a pretty good list of potential bugs you may run into. If there is something else or you need further clarifications on what these mean to fix them, I encourage you to look them up in another resource like Google. Standard Java C warnings. These are general warnings you may see when you are using Java. These are things like deprecated, warning when code uses depreciated or old API. You have had a division by zero, empty if statement, or things like a fall through. There are also warnings of when a finally block interrupts the flow or an override warning that is not properly annotated by the @override expression. There are also what is called raw types, serialization, unchecked or unnecessary casts that warn you when different things are occurring that need your attention. Suggestions. There are lots of suggestions I think you should be able to try out in order to see what and how you can manipulate language in Java. These are quite a few things and span a lot of different areas. I encourage you to look into how to assign and return a new variable instead, or to assign unused constructor parameters to a given field. You also have options to combine two nested if statements, if this is something you find appropriate to your causes. There are also ways to convert some anonymous to a member, convert what's called a lambda body to use a block, or express to anonymous interclass, or even member reference. You can also convert lambda expressions to member reference or use it to explicit parameter types. There are also options to convert integer constants to a different base or even create subclasses or test classes for a selected source. You could also look into how to do things like fill missing cases to switch, or even expand enhanced for loops or a declaration of instance of. You can also tell Java to invert if and join ifs into if-else. These are all helpful tools and suggestions that are able to assist you with developing your knowledge of just what Java is capable of. Testing. With testing, you want to look out for inconvertible parameters of assert equals, incorrect order of parameters of assert equals, or assert equals, for any other parameter. Basically, these are functions you can use to discover things about the parameters of what you are doing. Threading. Here are some different types of statements you could use if you would like to thread in any particular circumstance. These can be things you may need to use in the future, like invoking a condition, invoking thread, locking, and nested synchronized blocks, double-checked locking, notify, or wait. Basically, all of these .notify or .wait, etc. type of extensions do different things within your programming that allow you to do some more complex functions. I want to reiterate again that all of these categories may not be something you are ready to have complete knowledge of at this time. You are learning and definitely take your own comfort level into consideration with what you feel is a reasonable scope. I encourage you to really study the material in the first few chapters and gain a great understanding as to the basic ins and outs of Java. Resources. There are literally thousands of options when it comes to resources to assist in your learning process, which can be overwhelming at first. Sometimes it is hard to know exactly what will be helpful to you. The first piece of advice I would like to give is that you should aim to find resources that address your specific problem. It is important to see the problem or answer in the title of the book or article you are reading. If you use this simple strategy, I guarantee that you will have a much easier time answering the questions you may have. This isn't a foolproof strategy, but it is a good place to start. There are a lot of step-by-step tutorials that you may want to look at if you get caught up in the programming rut. These tutorials can provide you with steps that break down how and why you should use certain terminology, spacing, or even data types. They can easily be found by searching for something like a basic Java walkthrough for beginners. In case any of the content in this book is not quite as step-by-step as you need, there is no shame in needing more help and finding something that will help clarify or cement ideas for you. We also see lots of people getting help through forums. These are great places to access because you literally have thousands of people putting their input into whatever topic you are researching. Most of the time, within the programming and coding community, people generally want to help newbies because they know what it is like to once be in your shoes. Remember that not all advice or coding examples may be helpful to you. Stick to beginner forums at this point in order to not overwhelm yourself with the amount of possibilities out there. There are also a ton of articles or magazines you could look to or subscribe to in order to assist you with building your knowledge. I think a lot of people disregard actual printed media because we are in such a digital age. However, there are still many popular magazines out there that can provide up-to-date, useful tips and suggestions for you. Among the most popular of these magazines are Wired and PC World that I have found to be helpful in my quest for knowledge. They generally write at a level that any beginner can understand, and if they do not, they will provide resources for you to understand, which is a great thing as media is widespread and these magazines are meant to be informative to those of all walks of life interested in computers and coding and programming. Do not discount online articles from major publishers either. You never know where and when there will be useful information. Also, never discount the power of things like libraries or code editors. Each of these types of tools can assist you with finding out code you may want to use and want to make sure will not be riddled full of errors. These resources provide you with a plethora of usable code that can assist you with any potential trouble source you may run into with your coding and programming. I do caution, however, that you fully understand the code in case there are any issues with it you can figure out where and how to address them. Another great place to find resources in YouTube videos. These videos are ways for you to watch programming examples in more of a real-life scenario that may be of great assistance to you. Although it is great to read and have the information, the beauty of a video is that you can visually see what is expected of you and how another person does it. No matter how hard I try in this book, I am unable to give you that kind of demonstration, so that is a great place to utilize YouTube. When it comes to the quality of videos, just like with finding any resource, it can be a bit of sifting through unhelpful videos in order to find ones that you can actually use. My advice to you is similar to that of a search on Google or something. Make your search description as close to the content you would like to see. This enables the results to hopefully contain those words together. Think of the search function in terms of the statements we have talked about. You need to specify the data you want in order for the computer to return the results you want. Once again, remember that computers do not infer meaning like humans can. They are straightforward to a fault. Remember also to use both your own brain and perhaps friends that are also interested in computer programming and coding in order to brainstorm solutions to potential issues. Never discount yourself and your own ability to look for answers in simply trying out different solutions within your own sandbox to play with coding and programming in. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Conclusion. The aim of this book was to give you a how-to guide for what and how Java programming is and how you can learn to apply it in your own computer programming skill toolbox. Although this is a beginner's guide, I have given you a great general set of terms, rules, and examples of how Java works. Through the pages of this book, I hope you have been able to get easy to understand terminology, ideas, and methodologies you will be able to take with you as you continue to learn more. From the first chapter, where I outlined the basics of computer programming, the goal of my book was to make the material something anyone could understand. The aim of my writing was to ensure that even a total novice could understand the basics and be able to, even if you never used them, understand a little more about how computers actually function. As technology and computers in particular are a huge part of our daily lives, I feel strongly that we should understand them more to make our own lives easier. When it comes to programming and coding, it may not be something everyone has an affinity to as a hobby, but it really is quite enjoyable once you begin to speak the language. As with learning anything new, particularly a language, there is always a learning curve. If you have read this book and still feel weary of the programming world, maybe take a few days and just reflect on the content and come back and read it again. I always use this tactic, and it typically makes more sense if you let the content marinate for a while. For those of you who have fully grasped the content on the first go-round, more power to you. It is always important to remember that you cannot remember everything all the time, and there are great resources out there for you to refer to when you may not be able to recollect something. I hope that this will be a book you will come back to in the future to get a greater understanding of the beginner concepts we can sometimes forget as we get into more advanced programming techniques or situations. This has been Java, the complete guide for beginners to learn Java programming fast. Java, Java for beginners, Java programming for beginners, Java programming, Java coding, Java crash course, Java workbook. Written by Leonardo Gorman. Narrated by Mindy Newell. Copyright 2017 by Leonardo Gorman. Production copyright 2017 by Leonardo Gorman.
JavaScript Ultimate Beginner's Guide. Written by Leonardo Gorman. Narrated by Ryan Cox. Introduction. Congratulations on downloading JavaScript Ultimate Beginner's Guide, and thank you for doing so. The following chapters will discuss everything that you need to know about JavaScript and how to get it to work with your coding languages. JavaScript is a great option to use because it can work directly within the web page that you want to work on, and it can develop some of the best code that you need to make things work well on the web. This is a powerful tool to use when coding, and since the language is based in English, it is pretty simple to use. This guidebook will give you all the tools that you need to get started learning the best way to use JavaScript, no matter your skill level with coding. We will start with some of the basics of why JavaScript is so great and how to install the program before moving on to the different things that you can do in order to write the code. From variables to operators to functions and more, you will be able to create some great codes with all of the information that you will learn in this guidebook. There is so much that you'll be able to do when you get started with JavaScript. This language is so simple to use, but since it is able to work through the web and avoids going through the processor and taking up a lot of memory, it is going to provide for a clean and smooth transition for all of the users at the same time. Use this guidebook to get all the basics you need to create your first code using JavaScript. There are plenty of books on this subject on the market. Thanks again for choosing this one. Every effort was made to ensure it is full of as much useful information as possible. Please enjoy. Chapter 1. Learning the Basics of JavaScript. JavaScript was originally invented by Brendan Eich in 1995 and has become one of the best known and most widely used scripting languages in the world today. It is a really high-level programming language that is also interpreted, open-sourced for more updates and newer changes to it from different programmers, and has the ability to work across platforms, so you can combine it with some of the other languages if you would like. JavaScript will use the OOP scripting language, which means that it's set up to work with web programming. It can pretty much tell the web page what you would like it to perform once you are done with the code, simply by having you write out statements that will make the pages interactive. While you will also need HTML and CSS to get the layout and the contents onto the web page, JavaScript is going to be responsible for the coding and making sure that the commands are executed in the manner that you want. One of the biggest things that people will get messed up with is JavaScript and Java. While both of these are going to use the same kinds of syntaxes and have the same standard library, they are actually different programming languages that will not work exactly the same. This guidebook is going to focus on JavaScript, so recognize that there is a difference. JavaScript is a great option for you to go with when it comes to learning how to use a strong programming language. It has all the features that you need without having to worry about the code being too hard to write out. It has many of the great features that people will want out of any programming language, and it does not take too long to learn how to do. Benefits of using JavaScript. Many people wonder why they should use JavaScript instead of another programming language. There are quite a few of them, and some are really good for beginners, while others are reserved for those who have been in the programming business for a long time. JavaScript is a great option to choose when you want a versatile and fun language to work with that also has some power behind it. Here are some of the reasons that you should consider JavaScript for your programming needs. It is executed on the client side of things. That means you will not need to use a web server in order to work and execute the script. You will instead do all of this on the processor of the user. This saves a lot of bandwidth and some strain on the web server, so it is a much better option to use. An easier language. Compared to some of the other options that you could choose in languages, JavaScript is easy to learn due to the fact that the syntax is pretty close to English. It also has a good library of pre-written syntaxes that you can use in order to find the ones that you need to create the program, or to customize whatever you need to make it your own. Fast. The processing and the result of the code will be done almost instantly, sometimes depending on the task, since you don't need to have it processed through a web server first. This makes the information easy to get to the user right away, rather than having them wait a while for the whole thing to process. Has a lot of functionality with web pages. Some third-party add-ons will allow developers of JavaScript to write bits of code that can be placed on the web page to extend how functional it is. If you are using a website and you need a specific feature to work, you will be able to write the code and then use a company such as GreaseMonkey that will be able to implement it onto your web page. Simplicity. There are some programming languages that may be able to do a lot of things thanks to the power behind them, but they are so complicated and can be confusing to someone who is just starting out. If the user is not able to read through the code at all, they may be too scared to give it a try or find that it is too hard to learn. But with JavaScript, you will find that this program is really easy to get the hang of, and you will be able to learn how to get it done in no time. Versatility. While JavaScript is able to work with a lot of the projects that you would like to handle, there are some things that it isn't able to do. But it does have the versatility that you need to work with some other languages so that you can get more done. You can also insert it into any web page that you want regardless of the extension on the file. Works well with Perl and PHP and other languages so that you can do more of what you want with coding. While there are quite a few good things about using JavaScript as your first choice for writing some great code, there are a few disadvantages. First, some worry about the security issues that come with JavaScript. Once the codes of this language are added to a web page, they are sometimes able to exploit how the user's system works. And since this is all done right away, this could be dangerous for the person who is trying to look on that web page. There are some safety features in place on most websites to try and prevent this, but this is still an issue that will come up. You should take the time to go through your web page and ensure that the right safety procedures are in place to protect your customers. You don't want to lose out on customers because someone else was able to write a dangerous code on your system and send it through to your users to look at. A good antivirus or other protections can go a long way in preventing these things from happening. There are also some issues when it comes to rendering JavaScript. Since all the engines have different layouts, JavaScript will sometimes come out inconsistent, and you are going to notice this as different users go through and try to use your web page. This can make it hard to write a page because some people may be able to see it just right, while others are going to get a page that looks all jumbled up. JavaScript is working towards a universal standard for their pages, but there is still a long way to go. Learning how to get the program to look nice on a lot of browsers should be one of your main concerns when getting started. Using JavaScript is a great way to write out the coding language that you want in order to create a web page on your own server. Since it doesn't need to go through a processor in order to download, it is much faster to use and has the extensive library that you need to create a really great system of code. Whether you are a beginner or you have been working on coding for some time, the JavaScript language is a great choice for you. Setting up JavaScript. When you are ready to set up JavaScript, one of the first things that you will need to do is set up the environment that you will use when writing out the code. Eclipse is often the environment that is recommended to go with JavaScript since they work well together and it is easy to install Eclipse. The basic steps for downloading this software include: go online and look up the link for downloading Eclipse. You should check out the latest version that is stable of Eclipse and then make sure you are picking the right kind. For example, if you have a 64-bit computer, you should choose the 64-bit Eclipse option. You can find Eclipse downloads at https://eclipse.org/downloads. When the box comes up, click on the eclipse.exe in order to open up the file. You can choose which local directory that you would like to use as a workspace. You get the choice of choosing or creating a directory on your drive, and then can click the OK button to get started. When you get to this point, you will need to navigate to File, New, Static Web Project. You then click on the link that will allow you to open the dialog box that asks you to enter your project's name. Pick what you would like to call the project and then click on the Finish button. You will notice on the left side of Eclipse, you can expand the directory of the project, and on the right, you can click on the Web Content folder. You can add an HTML file to your current project. Just go to New and then HTML. This will open up the dialog box that you can enter a file name for. Click on Finish again, and this will add in the HTML file to your current project. When you are using JavaScript, you should take the time to look at the library that is available on this programming language. JavaScript is one of the most common programming languages to use since it is based on the English language, can be used on web pages, and has a lot of power with it. Since this program is so popular to use, it is not uncommon to find a huge library. You are able to use this library to your advantage. You will find that there are lists of syntaxes and codes that you are able to use within this system that will make writing your code easier than before. You can pick out a few of these or try some of them out to see what all of them are able to do or to speed up the code writing process, something that can be really great when you are a beginner in this programming language. By this point, you have set up what you need to get started with JavaScript. You have a project opened to start working on, have set up the work environment that is required in order to get started. We use the example of Eclipse, but you can get a different option if it is right for you. And then open up a text box to get HTML working inside. Once all of this is in order, you will be able to get started writing some amazing codes. Even though JavaScript is high technology and has a lot of cool features, they have made it extremely easy to get started in the program. If you just have a few minutes to go through the steps that were listed above, you will be able to start using some of the codes that are listed in the following chapters. Chapter 2. Creating your first program in JavaScript. While you may be excited to get started on working on your very first program with this coding language, we need to look at some of the basics that come with this. You need to understand how some of the syntaxes work in this language, as well as the different words, indentations, and even what punctuation marks are going to mean. Let's go ahead and look at some of these basics so that you have an idea of where everything should be placed when writing your own code. JavaScript is a versatile coding language that you are going to be able to inject anywhere you would like in your page, as long as you have the HTML tags >script >script around what you would like to insert. But in most cases, you will be recommended to place the script that you want to use between the head sections, or the >head >head tags. When the browser is taking a look at the content on the page, or the HTML on the page, it is just going to read through the whole thing like reading through a book. But when the browser program comes to the >script tag, it will start to interpret whatever you have written between these tags and won't stop until it reaches the >script part of the tag. This allows the program to interpret what you would like to have on the page in any location that you would like. When working with the script tag, you will be able to give them one of two attributes, including language. This is the attribute that will specify what kind of scripting language you are using. The value for the JavaScript language is basically JavaScript. If you are using a newer version of HTML, this is something that has been phased out, so you may not need to worry about it at all. Type. This is the attribute that will indicate the scripting language that you are using, and the value that you are using with it will be set to text/JavaScript when in the JavaScript language. Writing a program. At this point, you may be a bit confused on what is going on and what all of these things mean. Let's take a chance to open up the HTML file, use the steps that were given in the first chapter if you don't already have this opened up, and then we can get started at writing your first JavaScript program. To do this, just use the code that is below. !_doctype space HTML greater than. !HTML greater than. !head greater than. !meta char set dash quote ISO dash 88859 dash 1 end quote greater than. Less than title greater than. My first JavaScript program. Less than slash title greater than. Less than slash head greater than. Less than body greater than. Less than script language equals quote unquote JavaScript. Type equals quote text /JavaScript end quote greater than. Document.write open parentheses quote welcome to JavaScript first program end quote end parentheses semicolon. Less than /script greater than. Less than /body greater than. Less than /HTML greater than. This may seem like a lot of information to put into the code, but it is going to ensure that you are getting everything in that is needed to make a great code that others can read through. Let's separate each of the parts out to help you understand what is going on a little bit better. Explaining the code. In this code, the JavaScript code was inserted between the less than body greater than ... less than /body greater than tags in the HTML. The code was first declared with the right attributes, and then with using the document object, you were able to write out the message that helped to welcome others to the web page. So when this is executed, the web page should have the words "Welcome to JavaScript First Program" right at the top. Output. When you take the HTML program that we just wrote and try to execute it, the results that you will get would be "Welcome to JavaScript First Program." This is basically what you told the computer system to write, so if you have put everything into their exact right spaces within the code that you were writing, this is the exact phrase that should show up when you were working on the code. Line breaks and white spaces. When it comes to having spaces in your code, or even line breaks, you can use them as much as you would like. These can often help clear up what you were writing, and you won't have to worry about the code getting too long or too hard to read. That being said, it really doesn't matter how much, if any, space that you put into the code. The browser parser is not going to read these spaces, so you can write the code out in any way that works for you. This makes it easy for you to create the indentation, lines, and other parts that you need in order to make sense of the program, to help format it properly, and to keep it looking nice. Just because the lines and the spaces aren't recognized in JavaScript does not mean that you should completely ignore them in the process. When you are first getting started with this language, it may be a good idea to add in a few more line breaks and indents to your code. This is going to make it a bit easier to read through, and you can catch some of the mistakes a bit earlier. The extra white spaces aren't going to change how the system will read through the information, but it can make it easier for you to read the code, and for other beginners to know what you were trying to write out. Using semicolons. For the most part, you will end all of your statements using the semicolon when you are in JavaScript. These are optional if you are placing the statements on different lines from each other, so the choice is really up to you. If you just write out the code with everything on one line as a continuous string, you will need to add in the semicolon. But if you are separating out the statements as you go on to different lines, it is your choice whether you would like to use them. It is considered good programming practice to have them there regardless, but the program will work whether you place them there or not. The codes that we have in this guidebook will use the semicolons to help keep things clear. Case sensitivity. You will notice that JavaScript is one of the languages that is sensitive to the cases that you are using. This means that you need to keep your use of uppercase and lowercase letters consistent throughout the program. This is true for everything that you label, including identifiers, function names, variables, and keywords. For example, when you are using JavaScript, an all-capital learn and an all-lowercase learn will be different when the programming language is going through it. This is important to remember when you are naming your functions and statements. If you name one of them JavaScript in all caps, and then try to search for it or bring it back out by using the unpunctuated JavaScript word, you are going to get an error sign. You do get some saying what you name them, but try to keep all of the names in the code consistent so that you name them the same way and can easily call them back up when they are needed. Writing comments. There are times when you will need to write out a comment in JavaScript. You may want to tell someone a bit more about the program, or you are interested in explaining what should be placed in each of these statements. There are a few comment styles that are followed when you are using JavaScript in your coding, including single lines. If your comment is just going to take over one line, you simply need to use the double slash to get it started. Multiple lines. Sometimes your comments will be a bit longer, and they can take over a few lines. For this, you will use /* to start the comment, and then */. You are able to use this on single line options as well if you were worried about formatting. JavaScript will also recognize the HTML comment if you would like to stick with this. The HTML comment is !! This will be treated just like a single line comment in this language. Closing sequence. The HTML closing sequence sign of forward arrow is not going to be recognized in JavaScript. If you would like to use this sign in your code, you will need to write it like this, // forward arrow. When you use these options, you are telling the interpreter that it should not read the comment. You are able to put as many of these within your code as you need, as long as you use the proper formatting so that the interpreter knows what you are leaving there for others and what it should leave alone. Once the comment is over, the interpreter will go back and start executing whatever else you have written in the code. There are a lot of different times when you will need to write out a comment to help make sense of things in your code. If you want to tell someone what you are doing within the code, answer some questions, or help yourself or another coder to understand what information needs to go into these statements, these comments are great. You can add in as many of the comments as you would like, as long as you use the right signals, because the compiler will not read through them and they won't try to execute them at all. Some examples of using comments in JavaScript includes !! space HTML greater than, !HTML greater than, !head greater than, !meta charset equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than, !title greater than, JavaScript comments, !/ title greater than, !/ head greater than, body greater than, script space type equals, quote, text/JavaScript, end quote, greater than, !! the opening sequence single line comment, the closing sequence HTML comment, // greater than, // this is a single line comment, ***, this is a multiple line comment in JavaScript, *// less than / script greater than, less than / body greater than, less than / HTML greater than. Output. When you do the program in HTML that we listed above, the output will just be blank. This is because the whole program is listed out as a comment, and the interpreter is not going to list out the comments because it has learned not to read them after the signals that we discussed above. If you had added some other code in there, the interpreter is only going to read that, and it will ignore the comments that you add into the code. You are allowed to put in as many comments as you would like, as you can see from the example above, as long as you choose the right symbols to go with it, so that the interpreter does not give you an error sign. These are just some of the basic things that you need to understand in order to get started with using JavaScript on your own. Each part can help you to write out the syntax that you want and ensures that you are getting the very most out of your written code. Take some time to experiment with the comments, and for some of the other aspects we have discussed, to figure out how these are going to work for you. Chapter 3. Working with the JavaScript Syntax. The syntax of any programming language is really important. It is going to help you to organize the code that you are using and ensures that you are writing out everything so that it makes sense to the environment and the interpreter that you are using. If you put the syntax for another programming language in here, such as for C++ or Python, you will find that you will get syntax errors when you try to execute the code in HTML. This is why it is so important to understand how the syntax of JavaScript works, so that you are able to input your codes correctly. The programs you need in JavaScript. When you are working with JavaScript, you are working on a program that uses a sequence of instructions that are parsed and then executed by a particular browser program. This is an online program that allows you to make changes in a website or other web-related material, so getting the code to work on a variety of different browsers can be a challenge for some who are using JavaScript. But with the right sequence of instructions, you will find that it is easier to make this work more of the time. These instructions that you send to the program are called statements. All of the statements that you will create inside this programming language will be composed of a few different parts, including comments, keywords, expressions, operators, and values. Let's take a look at all of these to understand how they will work within the program, and how they are going to help you to write the perfect instructions to execute your program each time. Values. There are two types of values that will come when using JavaScript. These are known as variable values and fixed values. If you are dealing with literals in this language, you are dealing with a value that is fixed, and the variable values will just be known as variables. There are a number of rules that you will need to follow when it comes for writing a fixed value or a variable in JavaScript. First, your numbers will be defined either with or without the decimals, and the strings will be the text that you write in that has either a double or a single quote around it. Variables are another thing that you can use within JavaScript. These will be identified by the var keyword so that the program will understand that you are working with the variables so that it can execute the program correctly. When you are using a variable and trying to assign a value to it, you will use the equal sign. Operators. Operators can hold a special part when working in JavaScript. They are often going to help out with assigning a value to your variable, helping with some basic arithmetic operations, and so much more. There are two main types of operators that you can use in this programming language, and the signs that go with them will vary based on which one you are using. The two main types of operators found in JavaScript include assignment operator. This is the one you will use in order to assign a value or values to your variable. You will use the equal sign to show this relationship. Arithmetic operators. These are the operators that are going to be used for the various arithmetic operations that you may use in your program, including subtractions and addition and division and multiplication. You will use the signs plus, minus, star, and / to show these. There are many ways that you will be able to use these operators in your codes to help do guessing games, to do basic math equations, and more within your web page. You can experiment with adding in the signs or assigning values to your different variables to see which results you end up with. Expressions. When you create an expression inside of JavaScript, you are creating a combination of operators, variables, and values. These are going to work together to come up with a computation or an evaluation. The expression can contain some other variable values, including strings and numbers. For example, using Java plus script will give you the computation of JavaScript. Here is a good example that you can use to see how some of these expressions will work in your code and the results that they can give you. Less than $doctype space HTML greater than. Less than HTML greater than. Less than head greater than. Less than meta charset equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than. Less than title greater than JS expressions, less than / title greater than. Less than script type equals, quote, text / JavaScript, quote, greater than. Var A equals 101, colon, / variable, assignment operator, and literal as number. Var B equals 300, semicolon. Var addition equals A plus B, semicolon. Var stir1 equals, quote unquote, Java, semicolon, / variable, assignment operator, and literal as string. Var stir2 equals, quote unquote, script, semicolon. Var stir3 equals stir1 plus stir2, semicolon. Less than / script greater than. Less than / head greater than. Less than body greater than. Less than script type equals, quote, text / JavaScript, end quote, greater than. Document.write, open parentheses, quote, addition of A plus B equals, end quote, plus addition, close parentheses, semicolon. Document.write, open parentheses, quote, less than BR greater than. Concat of stir1 plus stir2 equals, end quote, plus stir3, close parentheses, colon, less than / script greater than, less than / body greater than, less than / HTML greater than. When you go through and have the program execute the code that we just wrote above, you will get the output addition of A equals B equals 401. Concat of stir1 plus stir2 equals JavaScript. You can always add in a few things or change out some of the things when you are working on this code. You can add in a few different words or send out a whole string in order to write anything that you would like. There are so many things that you are able to do when you are working with the code, so don't feel like you are limited by what we are writing here. Understanding how keywords work with JavaScript. Keywords in this programming language can be used to help the interpreter understand which actions that you want to have it do. For example, when you use the var keyword, you are going to tell the browser that you want to create a new variable in the system. These keywords are going to be reserved for you just when you are telling the browser how to act, and you are not supposed to use them as the functions, labels, or variables. The reserved words that you can use with JavaScript include abstract, Boolean, arguments, break, byte, case, catch, care, cows, do, const, continue, debugger, default, delete, double, else, enum, eval, export, extends, fouls, final, finally, float, for, function, go to, if, implements, import, in, instance of, int, interface, let, long, native, new, null, package, private, protected, public, return, short, static, super, switch, synchronized, throw, throws, this, true, transient, try, type of, var, void, volatile, with, while, and yield. You should be careful about using these words. They should be used only as a way to tell your browser the commands that it should follow. If you use them in other ways in the code, you are going to come up with an error message that can be hard to deal with. When you are creating the name of a new variable or your identifiers, you will need to be careful about the way that you are labeling the words. The first character needs to be either a letter, an underscore, or a $sign. You are not allowed to use numbers first, but any of the other characters in the name can include numbers, letters, $signs, and underscores to complete the rest of the title that you need to work on. Using camel case. There are times when you will want to use a few words in order to name your variable. If you want to call it My First Project rather than just Project, you will want to make sure that you are using the right tools to show how these are related and ensure that you are not going to cause some confusion with your cases. Some of the ways that you can join together a few words for naming your variable includes hyphens. You can combine as many words as you would like in the variable name simply by using some hyphens. Some examples of this are city-name, visa-passport, or second-address. Underscores. These are going to work similar to the hyphens, but you will use a different sign. For example, you would do first_address or city_name. Camel case. This is when you will keep the words connected, but you will capitalize the first letter of each of your words, such as first, capital F, address, capital A. But JavaScript takes this a bit differently. If you are using the camel case in this programming language, you will need to start the first word with a lowercase letter and then have the second word start with a capital letter, such as first, lowercase f, address, capital A. The syntax that you use with JavaScript will make a big difference for what you are able to do with this language. The keywords can help you reserve the right words to do actions on your code. Statements need to be written correctly so that you are able to get the right thing to print off of the screen. And variables and operators will work to help you to do basic computations or to save the program that you are working on. Understanding how all of these work can make a big difference in the results that you get. Chapter 4. Placing your JavaScript properly. There is a lot of flexibility in the choice of where you are able to place your code in your HTML document. There are a few ways that you are able to place your code inside the document, including JavaScript in >head >head section. This is the way that most people prefer to include their code. You will be able to place the functions in the head section and then have access to the functions on your web page. One way that you would be able to do this is shown in the following section. !!doc_type space HTML greater than. !HTML greater than. !head greater than. !meta char set equals quote ISO-8859-1 end quote greater than. Title greater than JS in head section /title greater than. Script type equals quote text/JavaScript end quote greater than. Function show alert open parentheses close parentheses open bracket alert open parentheses quote this is an alert from head section end quote close parentheses semicolon close bracket. /script greater than. /head greater than. body greater than. Input type equals quote-unquote button on click equals quote show alert open parentheses close parentheses semicolon end quote. Value equals quote call JavaScript end quote / greater than. /body greater than. HTML greater than. With this code executed in the HTML program, you will get the output of an alert message that says, "This is an alert from the head section," when you click on the button that will be present on the web page. Of course, you can change the message that you put in here to have it say whatever you would like on the web page. JavaScript in >body greater than ... /body greater than section. While the header is the most common place to put your JavaScript code, it is also possible to place it within the body when you are working on the HTML code, but it is not the most preferred method when you are working with this language. Despite this not being the preferred method, you will be able to use it at any time that you would like. A good syntax that you can use in order to get started with adding the code to the body of your page includes !_doctype space HTML greater than !HTML greater than !head greater than !meta charset equals quote ISO-88859-1 end quote greater than !title greater than JS body !title greater than !head greater than !body greater than !script type equals quote text/JavaScript end quote greater than document.write open parentheses quote welcome to JavaScript tutorials end quote close parentheses !/script greater than !p greater than body section of the HTML document !/p greater than !/body greater than !/HTML greater than. The output that you are going to get when you add this into the body of your HTML program, you will get Welcome to JavaScript Tutorials to show up on the screen in the location where you place this. JavaScript in the body and the head sections. You are able to place the JavaScript code in both the heading and the body of your HTML document. The code that you should use to get this started includes !_doctype space HTML greater than !HTML greater than !head greater than !meta charset equals quote ISO-8859-1 end quote greater than !title greater than JS body !title greater than !script type equals quote text/JavaScript end quote greater than function space show alert open parentheses close parentheses open bracket alert open parentheses quote this is an alert from head section end quote close parentheses semicolon close bracket !/script greater than !/head greater than !body greater than !script type equals quote text/JavaScript end quote greater than document.write open parentheses quote welcome to JavaScript tutorials end quote close parentheses !/script greater than !/p greater than body section of the HTML document !/p greater than !input type equals quote unquote button on click equals quote show alert open parentheses close parentheses semicolon end quote value equals quote call JavaScript end quote / greater than !/body greater than !/HTML greater than. The output that you are going to get when you execute the HTML program above, you will get an alert box that comes up stating this is an alert from the head section on the screen behind the alert box. You will get Welcome to JavaScript Tutorials on one line and then body section of the HTML document on the other line. This is just one of the examples of what you are able to do when placing JavaScript coding in different parts of the body of your HTML. Adding in JavaScript into an external file and then into the heading section. This is actually one of the best ways that you can add your code to your web page. Using an external file that has the extension jscode.js, you can then add this into the heading section of your HTML document. all of the functions that you have in this file can be called by different web elements throughout the body of your HTML document. A way to add the external file in the heading file of the document is in the following syntax. Less than !doc_type space HTML greater than. Less than HTML greater than. Less than head greater than. Less than meta char set equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than. Less than title greater than JS body, less than / title greater than. Less than script type equals, quote, text/JavaScript, end quote, greater than. src equals, quote, js/demo.js, end quote, greater than. Less than / script greater than. Less than / head greater than. Less than body greater than. Less than input type equals, quote unquote, button on click equals, quote, show alert, open parentheses, close parentheses, semicolon, end quote. Value equals, quote, call JavaScript, end quote, / greater than. Less than / body greater than. Less than HTML greater than. When you go through and execute the HTML program, you will receive an alert message that says, this is an alert from the head section, or another saying that you add into this section. And then the JavaScript function is going to call on a click event with the button that will be defined in your external file and is also included inside the head section on the document. This is pretty similar to what happens when you do the code in the head section of a document, but it is a bit more secure and you get some freedom with the codes and the functions that you are allowed to place on the button. As you can see, there are a number of different things that you are able to do with JavaScript code, even when it comes to deciding where you would like to place it within the body of your HTML document. Most of the time, it is best to keep it in the heading as this will work better, and if you can insert an external file into the heading, you will be able to increase the things that you can do with this. But if you would like to add it in with the body of the document or go through and place it in the body and in the heading, this is allowed, although not common practice, and will work fine as long as you place everything into the syntax properly. Chapter 5. Using variables on your JavaScript codes. Variables are important when you are writing out your code. They are going to determine the characters that you are going to use inside of your code, and they are often attached to a value of some type that will come up on the screen when you add them into the code. There are 3 different types of data that you could use in your code, including numbers. These will either be whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, and 4, or numbers with a decimal point like 3.4, 2.2, and 1.5. Strings or text. These are the words that you would like to come up on the screen. For example, you could type in, "This is my language," or some other phrase into this part and get the results that you would like. Boolean. These are basically variables that are going to come up as either true or false. These can be fun because if you are able to put 1 or 2 or even more in order to get different statements to come up based on whether the conditions are true or false. One thing to note about this language compared to other programming languages is that it will not make distinctions between floating point values and integer values. In JavaScript, all of the numbers are going to be considered floating point values, and the language is going to use the 64-bit floating point format in order to represent the numbers that you are using. Variables. When using variables in JavaScript, the variables will contain data containers that you are able to place data of your choice inside, and then later refer to this data with simply naming the container. You will need to use the var keyword in order to declare when a variable is going to be used. An example of the syntax of this is less than !doc_type space HTML greater than, less than HTML greater than, less than head greater than, less than meta char set equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than, less than title greater than JavaScript variables, less than / title greater than, less than script type equals, quote, text/JavaScript, end quote, greater than. Var name equals, quote unquote, appy, semicolon. Var age equals 21. Var salary equals 10,000, comma, expenses equals 12,000. Alert, open parentheses, quote, name, colon, end quote, plus name, plus, quote, age, colon, end quote, plus age, plus, quote, /n salary, colon, end quote, plus salary, plus, quote, expenses, colon, end quote, plus expenses, close parentheses. Less than /script greater than, less than /head greater than, less than body greater than, less than /body greater than, less than /HTML greater than. Let's take a moment to look at what this code is trying to tell us. When you try to store the value of your variable, you are doing a process called variable initialization. You are able to do this process at any time when you want to create the variable or even at a time when you want to use the variable. For example, in the above code, there are 4 different variables that are available, and each of them has a value that is assigned to them. One of the variables is assigned to salary equals 1,000, and another one is assigned to name equals appy. So when it is time to execute the program, the information that is going to come up on the screen will be name appy, age 21, salary 10,000, expenses 12,000. When you are declaring the var keyword, you should only do it once. You are not allowed to redeclare this variable more than once in your code. Luckily, you can make some changes and get some different results if you would like, because JavaScript has the ability to hold value from any of the data types, whether they are strings, numbers, or something else. And since it is an untyped language, you will not need to tell the compiler what the variable will hold. In addition, the value type of your variable is allowed to change during the execution process, something that the parser is able to take care of for you automatically. The scope of the variable. The variable in this program is going to vary based on the region of the program that you are dealing with. There are 2 types of scopes that you will find in the variables that work on JavaScript. Global variables. In the global scope, the variable can be defined anywhere and everywhere on the code. It is also visible everywhere that you want to look in the current HTML document. Local variables. With the local variables, you are only going to be able to see the variable in the location or the function where it is defined. For example, the function parameters that you set will be considered a local scope. If you are going to have the same name for the global and the local variable, be aware that the local variable will take precedence over the global one, so keep this in mind when you are naming your variables and trying to set them up. Names of the variables. You will need to take some extra caution when you are naming the variables in your code. This is going to make it easier for you to name the variable something that makes sense in the program while avoiding errors on the program or some other problems. Some of the rules that you should follow when naming your variables includes: never use one of the reserved keywords as your variable name. You will be able to find the list of keywords earlier in this guidebook, so take a look at them if you are uncertain that you are naming the variable something wrong. Never start out the name of your variable with a number. You were able to do _6 cats or 6 cats written out, but starting out with 6 cats in numerical form is not going to work. The names of your variables in this language are going to be case sensitive. The words help, capital H, and help, all lowercase, are going to be treated as different variables when using JavaScript. Variables are a great way to assign values to things within your code, and can make writing the code easier than you can imagine. You will need to pick out the right type that works for you, such as a global or local variable, and give it the right name without using a reserved keyword. But overall, they are easy to create and can call up when you need them the most. Chapter 6. Using operators in JavaScript. Another cool thing that you are able to do with a JavaScript is to bring out operators in order to assign a value to your variable or even to do some basic mathematical equations. There is so much that you can do when you bring in the operators that is a lot of fun. Matching games will often use some of these operators, as well as some of the other programs that you may want to work on with your code. Some of the different kinds of operators that you were able to use when working with the JavaScript code includes arithmetic operators. JavaScript offers a variety of different operators that you can use in order to complete some of the basic mathematical equations that you will need within your code. Some of these are pretty standard, and you will see them across different programming languages, but others may be new to JavaScript. Some of the arithmetic operators that you can use in your code include plus. This is the addition operator and is going to tell the code to add together two operands, such as x plus y. Minus. This is a subtraction operator and it is used in your code to subtract the second of your operands from the first one, such as x minus y. Star. This one will be used as the multiplication operator and can be used in order to multiply two operands together, such as x star y. Forward slash. This is the division operator and it will be used in your code in order to divide the two operands, such as x forward slash y. Percentage. This is the modulus, which is the operator that will output the remainder of the integer division. You will show this by x percentage y. Plus plus. This is the increment operator, and it is going to increase the chosen integer by 1. For example, you would use it like x plus plus, and you would get x to be 1 higher than usual. Minus minus. This is a decrement operator, and it is going to decrease the value of the integer by 1. It is possible to use a combination of these different operators depending on what answers you want to show up in your HTML document. Sometimes you may need to do an addition and subtraction in the formula, and at other times you may have a long string of arithmetic operators that you will need the system to work out for you. All of this is possible as long as you place them into the syntax properly for the compiler to read through. Comparison operators. The other type of operators that you may deal with when working on JavaScript are the comparison operators. These are basically going to help to assign a value to the variable that you are working with inside of a statement. There are a few different options as well, and often you will use this as a way to check whether or not something is true and what answer should be given based on the results. Some of the comparison operators that you may work with in JavaScript include equals equals. This is the equal operator and it is used to see if the value of two operands are equal or not. If the values are equal, your condition is going to be true. Exclamation point equals. This is the not equal operator and it is going to be used to check out two operands and to see if they are equal or not. If the values are not equal, the condition is going to be true. Greater than. This is the greater than symbol. This type of operator is going to be used to see if the value on the left operand is greater than the one on the right operand. If the one on the left is greater, then the condition is true. Less than. This is a less than operator and it is going to be used to see if the operand on the left-hand side is less than the operand on the right-hand side. If the left-hand side is less than, the condition is true. Greater than equals. This is the greater than or equal to operator. It is used to see if the value of the operand on the left-hand side is equal to or greater than the value of the operand on the right side. If this is correct, the condition is going to be true. Less than equal to. This is the less than or equal to operator. This operator will be used to see if the operand on the left is equal to or less than the value of the operand on the right. If this is correct, the condition will be true. Keep in mind that if the statements end up being incorrect for any of the operators that are listed above, the answer is going to be false rather than the true that is listed. You will be able to use this information later on with the if and if ... else statements to help you create different strings of text that you can use to keep your program running smoothly. Relational operators. Another type of operator that you were able to use when using the JavaScript language includes and. This is the logical AND operator. If both of your operands are non-zero results, then this operator will make the condition true. Line. This is the logical OR. It means that if any two of your operands are non-zero, then this operator will turn into a true condition. Exclamation point. This is the logical not. It means that if the operands are non-zero, this is going to be a false condition. Assignment operators. Assignment operators will be useful when you want to add some values to your variables. There are times when you can assign one value to different variables and so on in order to get your computer program to work the way that you would like. Some of the simple assignment operators that you may use in your coding include equals. This is a simple assignment and it is used to assign your right side value to the operand that is on the left side. Plus equals. This is the add and operator that will add together the right operand and the left operand, and then will assign this result to the operand on the left side. Minus equals. This is the subtract and assignment. This works kind of like the previous one. You will take the right operand and then subtract it from the left operand. The result is going to be assigned to the left operand. Star equals. This is the multiply and assignment, where you will multiply the operand on the right with the one on the left, and then assign the results to the left operand. / equals. This operator will divide the operand on the left side with those on the right operand, and then takes the result and assigns it to the left operand. All of these operators are going to allow you to do so much within the system. You will need each of them at different times, based on the different statements and functions that you want to work with inside of your code. Learn how each of these work with a bit of experimenting so that you understand how you will be able to benefit in the long run. Chapter 7. Teaching the program how to make decisions. There are times when you will need your program to make a decision for you based on the information that is being placed into the system. Most of your functions are going to give out an output based on whether or not the decision is true or false. If the statement is true, you will get one option, and unless you set the program up to make a decision for you, the program is just going to end if the conditions are false. Luckily, you can do some work with the code to make sure that you get results whether the condition is true or false. You just need to set up the syntax so that the code knows what to do. Here, we are going to discuss how you can teach your program how to make decisions based on the conditions it is given. The JavaScript language is going to support a few different kinds of conditional statements, including if statements, if-else statements, if-else-if statements, and switch case statements. We will talk about a few of these below to help you understand how they are going to tell the program how to make decisions based on the conditions that are met. The if statements. The if statement is one of the most basic control statements that you can use in this language. It is going to help execute your statement based on certain conditions being met. If the conditions are true, the statement will be executed. On the other hand, if the statement ends up being false, the system is just going to end that command. There are other statements that you can use that will prevent the program from ending when the conditions are false, but we will discuss those later. The following syntax is a good example of how the if statement will work. Less than !doc_type space HTML greater than. Less than HTML greater than. Less than head greater than. Less than meta charset equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than. Less than title greater than. Basic if statement. Less than / title greater than. Less than / head greater than. Less than body greater than. Less than script type equals, quote, text/JavaScript, end quote, greater than. Var salary equals 10,000, semicolon. Var expenses equals 12,000, semicolon. If, open parentheses, expenses are greater than salary, close parentheses, open bracket, document.write, open parentheses, quote, less than be greater than. Please either start earning more or spending less. Less than / be greater than, end quote, close parentheses, colon, end bracket. Less than / script greater than. Less than p greater than. We are inside the body section. less than / p greater than, less than / body greater than, less than / HTML greater than. When you place this into the HTML program, there will be one of two things that will happen. If your statement is true, the text, "Please either start earning more or spend less," will show up on the screen. But if the condition is not met, such as the person is earning more than they are spending, the program will just end since you haven't set up anything for this false statement. The if-else statement. Now, with the previous example, you were only getting a result if the conditions were true. You would get the phrase that you placed into the code to come up if the person was making less money than they were spending. But what happens if the person makes a good salary and is good at budgeting so they don't use up all their income in expenses? When you are just using the if statement, you will have nothing show up in the program at all. But this is where the if-else statement can come in good use. This allows you to have some options based on whether the condition is true or false. You can leave the first part the same and have the phrase come up if the condition is true. But if the condition is false and the person is earning more than they are spending, you can set the code up to have another phrase or action come up, such as, "Good job budgeting your money wisely." A good example of the syntax of working with an if-else statement is like the following. Less than ! Doc type space HTML greater than. Less than HTML greater than. Less than head greater than. Less than meta care set equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than. Less than title greater than, if-else statement, less than / title greater than. Less than / head greater than. Less than body greater than. Less than script type equals, quote, text/JavaScript, end quote, greater than. Var salary equals 12,000, semicolon. Var expenses equals 10,000, semicolon. If, open parentheses, expenses are greater than salary, close parentheses, open bracket, document.write, open parentheses, quote, less than be greater than. Please either start earning more or spending less. Less than / be greater than, end quote, close parentheses, colon, end bracket. Else, open bracket, document.write, open parentheses, quote, less than be greater than, you have enough money to spend. Less than / be greater than, end quote, close parentheses, semicolon. Less than / script greater than. Less than p greater than. We are inside the body section. Less than / p greater than. Less than / body greater than. Less than / HTML greater than. With this option, you can have two different outputs. If the conditions end up being true and the user spends more money than they are earning, the first statement will appear on the screen. But if they are smart at budgeting, then they have a condition that is false, and they will get the second statement. You can do this as many times as you need within the program, so you could easily have 5 or more of these going down the line based on what you are doing in your program. There are also some variations that you are able to use that go along with this. You can add in some more options that allow you to have a few of the if-else statements, allow the user to pick from a few different numbers and options to see which one is going to meet up with their needs the best, and so much more. Each of these will go off the same basic formula as we have talked about so far in this chapter, and there is just so much power that you will be able to get from these simple statements. You can create quite a bit of code, work on doing different games, and so much more. Chapter 8. Using Functions in JavaScript. Functions are an important part of your coding in JavaScript, as well as with some of the other coding languages that you choose to use, and understanding how they work and are stored in your codes is important. A function is a block of code that is reusable and organized so that you are able to use it many times in order to perform operations that you need in your program. It can help to eliminate some of the time that you would waste writing out the same code a bunch of times. When the function is used properly, the programmer will be able to break up a really big program into a smaller number of manageable functions that don't have all the redundancy, are easier to read, and easier to handle overall. JavaScript does have some of its own functions that are already placed into the system, and for which you are able to use whenever your code needs it. But you are also able to create some of your own functions based on what you would like the code to do. This is a fun place to mess around and experiment with what you are able to do when it comes to functions. The definition of functions. Before we get too far into how to use functions, let's take a look at the definition of a function. Basically, functions are going to be a usable point in the code, and it can be placed at any point in the code, for which you will only need to define them once. In this programming language, you will define the function by using a keyword that is followed by the unique name of the function, a list of parameters that you can fill or leave empty, and a statement block that you will surround with some curly braces. You will need to also set up the parameters that come with your function. You are able to pass on some different parameters to the function while you are calling it out. The values of these passed parameters are usable inside of the function, and you can do any manipulation that is needed on the parameters. You don't have to have parameters with the function either if you choose not to do this with your program, or the one function can have several parameters. If you do have several parameters with one function, make sure to separate each of them out with commas. An example of having parameters set for your function in this language includes less than !doc_type space HTML greater than, less than HTML greater than, less than head greater than, less than meta char set equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than. Less than title greater than, parameterized function, less than / title greater than. Less than script type equals, quote, text/JavaScript, end quote, greater than. Function space say hello to JavaScript. Open parentheses, message, comma, entity, comma, lang, close parentheses. Open bracket, alert, open parentheses, message plus, quote, to the, end quote, plus entity plus, quote, world of, end quote, plus lang, plus, quote, ! End quote, close parentheses, semicolon, close bracket. Less than / script greater than, less than / head greater than, less than body greater than, less than input type equals, quote, button, end quote. On click equals, quote, say hello to JavaScript, end quote. Open parentheses, single quote welcome, end quote, comma, single quote world, end quote, comma, single quote JavaScript, end quote, close parentheses, semicolon. Value equals, quote, call JavaScript, end quote, / greater than. Less than p greater than, body section of the HTML document. Less than / p greater than. Less than / body greater than, less than / HTML greater than. The outcome that you are going to get when you place this into the HTML program is an action box that will say, quote, welcome to the world of JavaScript, end quote. You can always change up what is being said and use this function as a way to write out your own code to have it say whatever you would like. Return statements. If you would like to work on one of these functions and have it return a value to you, this is an option that you can add into the code. This is completely optional as you will only use it when you want to get a value back from the function. When adding it into the code, make sure that the return statement is the last statement that is inside the function, otherwise the system is going to get confused and may send back an error message. Working with functions can add a lot more to what you are working on within your program. It may take a bit of time to get down, but the results can be pretty amazing when you do. Try out the syntax that is in this chapter and manipulate the words in other parts in order to get it to work out the best for your needs. Chapter 9. How Objects Work in JavaScript. Since JavaScript is an OOP language, or an object-oriented programming language, It has a few great capabilities when it comes to creating and storing different items inside. Some of the capabilities you are able to use with objects include encapsulation. This is the concept that you will store all of your related information, including methods and data, together inside of an object. Aggregation. This is the concept that will allow you to store one object inside of another object. Inheritance. This is a concept that will allow one class to inherit or even reuse the methods and properties of one or more classes. This is sometimes referred to as the parent class. Polymorphism. This is a concept that will allow you as a programmer to write a method or function that can execute a different task in different ways, but they will be defined at the exact same time. This is sometimes known as method overloading. Objects. An object is composed of certain attributes. The attribute can sometimes be the function of the property, and in this case, the function will be the method of the object. Properties of objects. When you are creating an object in JavaScript, you can use any of the three data types, including Boolean, string, and number, as well as the abstract data types like an object. The properties of an object are going to be the variables that you can use internally to create the methods of the object's properties, and they can also be used as globally visible variables. Because of all these properties, the object can be seen all throughout the page when done properly. A good syntax that you can use as an example includes less than !doc_type space HTML greater than, less than HTML greater than, less than head greater than, less than meta charset equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than, less than title greater than objects example, less than / title greater than, less than script type equals, quote, text/JavaScript, end quote, greater than, object name dot object property equals property value, semicolon, var stir equals document dot title, semicolon, less than / script greater than, less than / head greater than, less than body greater than, less than / body greater than, less than / HTML greater than. In this syntax, you are assigning the property value variable value over to the attribute object property, and then the object will be referred back to the object name within the syntax. Object methods. When you are talking about object methods, you are talking about the functions that are used by the objects to do required executions or manipulations. The function is going to differ from the method because the function is the standalone part of a statement, while the method is going to be attached to the object by the this keyword. The method is used by the syntax in order to display the different object contents on your HTML page. They will often be used to write out the input parameters that are passed onto the object method, and the different mathematical operations as well. For example, you may use the write open close parentheses method in order to pass on the string of text so that it is written onto the HTML page. Using the new operator. The new operator is going to be used in order to create an object instance. In order to create this kind of object in JavaScript, you are going to need to use the new operator, and then add the constructor method. The constructor methods can be array open close parentheses, object open close parentheses, and date open close parentheses, like shown in the following syntax. Less than ! doc_type space HTML greater than, less than HTML greater than, less than head greater than, less than meta charset equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than, less than title greater than the new operator, less than / title greater than, less than script type equals, quote, text/JavaScript, end quote, greater than, var student equals new object, open close parentheses, var languages equals new array, open parentheses, quote, JavaScript, end quote, comma, quote, Haskell, end quote, comma, quote, Python, end quote, close parentheses, semicolon. Var day equals new date, open parentheses, quote, August 24th, comma, 1989, end quote, close parentheses, semicolon. Alert, open parentheses, day, close parentheses, semicolon. Less than, / script greater than, less than, / head greater than, less than body greater than, less than, / body greater than, less than, / HTML greater than. When you go through and execute the HTML program above, you will get an alert box that comes out stating the date that you picked as well as a time in the Eastern Daylight Time. You can change around any of the dates, times, and other options to make it work for your needs. Object, open close parentheses, constructor. As was discussed a bit before, the constructor is going to be the function that will first create and then initialize the object in this language. If you use a special constructor function that is known as the object, open close parentheses, you are able to build up the object inside of JavaScript. The value that you are able to get from this constructor will be assigned back to the variable and will become known as the object reference variable. The objects that you use in JavaScript helps you to assign some variables, change the dates and numbers that you would like to use within JavaScript, and more. It is important to know how to use the objects in order to define the characteristics that you would like the program to have, so there is so much that you are able to do when using the objects. Chapter 10. Creating Events in JavaScript. The events in this programming language are the means that JavaScript will be able to interact with your HTML document. These events can be triggered when a value is manipulated either on the browser or on the HTML page. For example, when you download an HTML page, you are creating an event. If you click on a button on the page, you are creating an event. As long as the JavaScript code is interacting in some way with the HTML page, you are going to be creating an event. Programmers will be able to use these events in order to trigger and then execute the coded responses that they want, and they can include displaying a specific alert message, closing the window when the button is clicked, and even validating the form data. In JavaScript, the events are going to be a part of the DOM, the Document Object Model, Level 3. All web elements in HTML are going to have a set of events that can trigger the function code when needed. There are many different events that you are able to create on JavaScript, including offline. This is going to trigger when your document goes offline. On abort. This will be triggered when you want to abort an event. On a GTER print. This will trigger after your document has been printed. On before on load. This will trigger before your document loads. On before print. This attribute will trigger before the document prints. On blur. This one will trigger any time that the window starts to lose focus. On can play. This will trigger when the media is about to start playing, but it may have to stop in order to buffer. On can playthrough. This will trigger when the media is able to play all the way through to the end without stopping or needing to buffer. On change. This will trigger any time that the element changes. On click. This one will trigger when you click on the mouse. On context menu. This will trigger when you trigger the context menu. On DBL click. This attribute is going to trigger when you double-click on the mouse. On drag. This will trigger whenever you drag the element. On drag end. This is going to trigger when you get done with the operation of dragging. On drag enter. This will trigger when the element has reached a valid target drop area. You will be able to list out where you would like the target drop spot to be. On drag leave. This will trigger when the element is being dragged over the drop target that you picked. On drag over. This will trigger when you get started with the drag operation. On drag start. This will trigger right at the start of the drag operation. On duration change. This will trigger when the length of your media is changed. On emptied. This will trigger when your media source becomes empty all of a sudden. On ended. This will trigger any time that the media has reached the endpoint. On error. This option will trigger any time that an error occurs. On focus. This will trigger as soon as there is focus on the window. On form change. This will trigger when something on the form changes. On form input. This will trigger when the form on your page receives input from the user. On invalid. This is what will trigger when the element entered is invalid. On load. This one will trigger when the document has loaded. These are just a few of the different commands that you are able to use when you want to trigger an event within your HTML page. Each of them will have a trigger that you will need to have happen on the page if you would like to have that particular event occur. Let's take a look at one of the syntaxes that you can use when you want to create the onClick event in this language. Less than exclamation point doctype space HTML greater than. Less than HTML greater than. Less than head greater than. Less than meta charset equals quote ISO-8859-1 end quote greater than. Less than title greater than onClick events, less than / title greater than. Less than script type equals quote text/Java end quote greater than. Function show alert open close parentheses, open bracket alert, open parentheses, quote this is an alert on the onClick event, end quote close parentheses semicolon, close bracket. Less than / script greater than, less than / head greater than, less than body greater than, less than input type equals quote unquote button, onClick equals quote show alert open close parentheses semicolon end quote. Value equals quote call JavaScript end quote / greater than. Less than / body greater than. Less than / HTML greater than. When you type in this code to your HTML program, you are going to get the event of an alert box coming up with a message saying, this is an alert for the onClick event. Dialog boxes. Dialog boxes can be used in this language, and they will show up on your HTML page in order to ask for confirmation, to get input from the users, and to send out a warning or an alert. There are 3 types of dialog boxes that you can use in this language, including the prompt dialog box, the confirmation dialog box, and the alert dialog box. Alert dialog box. When you want to send out a warning message to your users, you will use the alert dialog box. This can be used to validate the form on the page or even just to send out a message where the user is not allowed to put in any information. The alert box will often just have one button to use, usually the OK button, and then the user will be able to proceed on with the page. The alert page can be nice when you have something that you want the user to know before going on. Some web pages that may use this include when you click on a link that will take you to a new website. You will be alerted ahead of time of a change of location, and you can choose to proceed or stay on the original web page. Confirmation dialog box. This kind of dialog box will be used when you would like to get the opinion of the user on 2 or more options. You will usually have 2 buttons that you are able to pick from, such as a cancel button and an OK button. When the user agrees to clicking on the OK button, the window will confirm that the user returned a true value, but if they click on the cancel button, the return is going to be false. The results will be based on the information that you place inside of your syntax. This can be a great option to use when you want the user to confirm some information, such as a username or password, to make sure that they are allowed to be inside of that page. You can make it something as simple as a yes or no answer, or change it up and make it something that needs a new input, like that username, depending on your needs. Prompt dialog box. This kind of dialog box is going to happen when the text box is going to accept the input from the user. This makes the system able to interact with the user. The user will be able to enter the data that they need into the field before clicking on the OK button. The parameters that this dialog box is going to accept includes a label that you would like to display inside a text box, or a default string that will be placed inside the text box. There will also be two buttons that you can see on the prompt dialog box, including the OK button and the Cancel button. Events and the dialog boxes allow you to have a bit more interaction between the user and the computer system. You will be able to make it easier for the user to choose what they would like to happen, such as loading the media files that you would like to place on the system, or even closing the page. You can send out messages, have a user place information into the boxes, and so much more. There is just so much that you are going to be able to do when you use JavaScript, and these options are just the beginning to help you out. Chapter 11. Creating a Loop Within Your Code. In most of this guidebook, we have been talking about functions and codes that will have just one input and one output based on the condition. In these codes, the statement that is the first one in the sequence will be executed in the program first, and then it will go down the line until the whole code has been executed. But if you would like to be able to run the same code block many times in your program, it is a good idea to learn how to work with loops. A loop has the ability to make a statement execute multiple times as long as the condition is true, and then the loop will exit as soon as the condition becomes false. There are a few different types of loops that are supported in JavaScript, including while loop, do-while loop, for loop, for-in loop, loop control statements. Let's take a look at how most of these work and how you would be able to use these in your own coding. While loop statements. The while loop is one of the most basic loop types that you can use, and it is pretty popular because of how simple the program is. This piece of code is going to continue to execute as long as your expression is true. Once the expression comes out false, the loop is going to stop working. An example of the syntax that uses the while loop statement is as follows. Less than !doc_type space HTML greater than. Less than HTML greater than. Less than head greater than. Less than meta charset equals, quote, ISO-8859-1, end quote, greater than. Less than title greater than while loop, less than / title greater than. Less than / head greater than. Less than body greater than. Less than script type equals, quote, text/JavaScript, end quote, greater than. Var counter equals 0. Document.write, quote, entering while loop, end quote, close parentheses, semicolon. While, open parentheses, counter less than 5, close parentheses. Open bracket, document.write, open parentheses, quote, current counter is, colon, quote, plus counter plus, end quote, less than br / greater than, close parentheses, semicolon, counter plus plus, close bracket, document.write, open parentheses, quote, exiting while loop, end quote, close parentheses, semicolon, less than / script greater than, less than p greater than. We are inside the body section. Less than / p greater than. Less than / body greater than. Less than / HTML greater than. With this formula, the loop is going to execute the HTML program through the counter 5 times, as long as the condition is held up to be true for these 5 times. You can change the counter to go up or down based on how many times you want to make the program do the work. Do-while loop statements. This kind of loop statement is going to be similar to what you found with the loop statement, except that with this one, the condition check is going to happen when you reach the end of the loop. This means that the code block will be executed a minimum of 1 time. If the code is found to have a false condition, then the statement is going to stop being run. But since it is not checking to see if the condition is false or not during execution, the program will run until the false condition is shown as the end. For loop statement. This is one of the most used looping statements that you will find within JavaScript programming. There are 3 parts that are very important and should be present when you are trying to make one of the 4 loop statements. These parts include loop initialization. This is where you will initialize the counter value to be the starting value. This statement will be executed before your looping process even begins. Test statement. This is a condition that your compiler is going to evaluate to see if it is true or false. If this condition is true, the code inside your loop will be executed. If the condition ends up being false, then your control will make the program exit the loop. Iteration statement. This is the place where you will be able to increase or else decrease the counter value that you want initialized during the first statement. In most cases, you will be able to put all 3 parts into one line that will be separated out with semicolons, and you can use some of the syntaxes that we used before. Loop control statements. You would use this kind of statement when you were looking to change out the execution of your statements from the normal sequence that it should use. When this execution is going to leave the scope, all of the automatic objects that you have created inside of that scope will be destroyed and removed. There are a few types of loop control statements that are supported inside of this language, including break statement. This kind of statement is going to be used in order to stop the loop statement and to transfer the execution of this statement right to the end of the loop. Continue statement. This kind of statement is going to force the loop to skip over the rest of the body and go right back to retesting the condition prior to restarting the looping body. Learning how to make looping work in your program is a more advanced part of working with a JavaScript language, and it can take some time to master. You will love all the things that you are able to do with this kind of feature once you start to work on some of your programs and want to make sure that the code is able to keep on going without having to keep placing it inside yourself. Try out a few of these codes that we have in this chapter to start to get a feel for how these can work for you. Conclusion. Thanks for making it through to the end of JavaScript Ultimate Beginner's Guide. Let's hope it was informative and able to provide you with all of the tools that you need to achieve your goals, whatever they may be. The next step is to get started with using JavaScript for your own coding needs. Some people are worried about getting started with a new coding language, or getting started with coding at all in the first place. But this is an exciting way to learn more about computers, design some of your own programs, and do so much more. JavaScript is one of the best coding languages out there. It has all of the power that you need to design some great coding online, while still being easy enough for a beginner to use. If you want to combine it with some of the other coding languages, this is easy enough to do since there are some similarities, and there is the benefit of the language being available in English, so that the keywords and other parts are easy to see and understand. You don't have to be scared of coding or feel like you can't create the programs that you want just because you didn't spend years in school learning how to do all of this stuff. With a bit of practice and some of the fun codes that we explore in this guidebook, you are certain to get the hang of this coding language and be able to write your own code using JavaScript in no time. Finally, if you found this book useful in any way, a review on Amazon is always appreciated. This has been JavaScript Ultimate Beginner's Guide, written by Leonardo Gorman, narrated by Ryan Cox. Copyright 2018 by Vincent Newt. Production copyright 2018 by Vincent Newt.